My dear friends, good evening. I welcome you to the talk on relevance of shares and debentures and a look at the distinction between shares and debentures which are used in the corporate finance. As we are all aware, corporate finance comprises of the following sources to help the working capital requirements of the corporate bodies. Mainly, the financial sources are available from two different categories. One being own sources, the other one, namely borrowed sources. A financial manager will draw such a plan keeping in view the prudent financial strategy of the company to get more of the own resources and proceed with the business activities. Otherwise, if there are no adequate funds from the own sources, then they depend on the external borrowings. These borrowings are again divided into three categories, where by issue of shares in case of public limited companies which are offered to the public for subscription. Second one being debentures with varied features, but they will have a permanent liability like periodical payment of interest or any other time bound obligations on other borrowings like bonds. And last one being borrowings with secured creditors by keeping a margin of some amount of the value of the assets as mortgage, and thus this will meet the financial requirements of the company. We will have a talk about the different types of shares which are issued by the public limited companies. At the outset, we know that the articles of association of the public limited companies will permit them to go in for issue of shares, also mentioned in the memorandum of association, to the public for subscription, because these are having lesser financial liability when compared with bonds or other documents. Borrowings which will have a bearing on the cash reserves of the company, but they will have a commitment to make periodical payment of interest in the form of cash outflows, and they are charged with the mortgage on the assets. Now we'll have the understanding of different types of shares. Preference shares usually carry a tag rate of dividend, but it has different options and types. Second one being equity shares or ordinary shares. Third one being deferred shares or founder shares. But from the 1956 Indian Companies Act, the issue of deferred shares were dispensed forthwith. Now we will discuss about the preference shares. The name itself denotes that there is a kind of speciality or priority or otherwise preference in the issue of this kind of shares. The holders of these preference shares will be entitled to receive a fixed rate of dividend, which is mentioned over the instrument or otherwise tagged. This will be payable only in the event of payment of dividends arising out of earnings or profits of the company. Suppose if the company does not make any profit, then they will not be paid. But this is somewhat costlier and causes some more liability as it will affect the outflow of cash reserves and cause a burden to the finances of the company. Now we will discuss different types of preference shares. Basically, there are 6 to 7 categories. First one being cumulative preference shares. Second one, non-cumulative preference shares. Third one being redeemable preference shares. Fourth one, non-redeemable preference shares. Next comes participating preference shares. And last one, convertible preference shares. Now, we'll discuss about the cumulative preference shares. As we have already told, the cumulative preference shares will carry a fixed rate of dividend, and in case the company does not any profit earn or dividends will not be paid during that financial year. But in the subsequent years, whenever the earnings are more and the company has already paid the fixed rate of dividend on the preference shares, from out of the funds of over and above earnings, these cumulative preference share holders will claim for the unpaid years in the form of arrears. But we should bear in mind this will be made only after effecting making the payments of regular periodical obligations like interest, insurance, taxes, and etc. Because debenture holders need to be paid interest regularly. Next comes non-cumulative preference shares. Here we can see very clearly that the name non-cumulative indicates that these preference shareholders do not have any right to receive the arrears which were unpaid earlier. Here, once it elapsed and not paid means they will not be entitled to claim any more dividend for that period. Basically, this is the only difference between cumulative preference shares and non-cumulative preference shares. Next, we have to see that these preference shareholders will have preference over equity shares who are the real owners in the event of liquidation of the company. Now, we will see the redeemable preference shares. The term redeem means to return or give it back. As such, redeemable preference shares, we mean that these are subjected to be redeemed over a period of time. So, hence, redemption will lighten the financial burden. Otherwise, keeping these preference shares any longer will cause heavy burden on the exchequer and cash outflows will take place. So, with a view to lighten the burden and easing the process of the financial management, redeemable preference shares are issued. Next comes the non-redeemable preference shares or otherwise irredeemable preference shares. These are the special types of shares which cannot be returned or redeemed during the lifetime of the company unless the company is about to be liquidated or winding up process is initiated by the official liquidator appointed by the court of law. Next comes the participating preference shares. These participating preference shares are a peculiar in nature and special type of shares which ranks better than equity shares in receiving dividends only, but not have any right, unlike equity shareholders, to take part in the management of the company either by contesting elections or joining the board of directors. Basically, these are not the real owners and hence they cannot join. But these people will usually take the normal dividend, and if any surplus is available, even after making for all the people, including equity shareholders, they will have additional stake to claim something more from the dividends. Next comes convertible preference shares. These convertible preference shares are the documents which are likely to be converted into the ordinary shares or equity shares, which will lessen the burden of liability and company gets relieved from this burden. Now you see, on becoming the ordinary shareholders or equity shareholders, from getting converting the preference shares, these people will have the right to take part in the affairs of the company and cast their vote in the elections. And thus, they may join the board of directors or exercise their vote in the annual general body meeting or extraordinary general body meetings, which are usually held periodically as per the provisions of the Companies Act 1956 and subsequent modifications from time to time. Now, the second category among the shares is equity shares or ordinary shares. These equity shares, as we have already known, being called as ordinary shares because the holders of these equity shares are the real owners of the company. They are ranking last in the event of liquidation of the company and in the winding up process. We have to note that the rate of dividend on this equity shares is not fixed. It may vary from year to year depending upon the earnings and profits of the company. These are the residuary beneficiaries. These people will have to bear the risk, and only after clearing dues of all the creditors, preference shareholders, they may get residuary claim. If it is with limited liability, then their share value may go out. Otherwise, in case of unlimited liability or shares limited by guarantee, their personal properties will also be attached to the extent of guarantee given or otherwise to the extent required. Now, we will have a discussion on the deferred shares because we know that these deferred shares are called as founders shares. Now they are not in vogue. They are dispensed with from the year 1956 as per the existing rules of the Indian Companies Act. Now, they do not exist at present. Now, let us have a small distinction on shares and debentures. So, the difference between these shareholders and debenture holders will give us a clear picture as to the holdings and their rights. Now, let us take one by one. A shareholder being a real owner, so he has the right to take part in the management of the company. He is entitled to receive the dividend when all the regular periodical obligations and payments are made. Whereas coming to a debenture holder, he is a mere creditor of the company. He lent the amount to the company and for which he will be receiving interest periodically. But in no case a creditor is the owner of the company. Second one is, as we have told earlier, shareholder will receive the dividend after making payments to preference shareholders and other debenture holders. If the company makes profits only, but it's not a mandatory right to ask for if the company does not make sufficient earnings. Whereas the rate of interest is fixed on the debentures and the debenture holder is entitled to receive the interest and he does not bother about the earnings and he will not take into cognizance of the fact and irrespective of that whether the company is in profits or losses, he will ask for payment of interest and he will claim as a matter of fact it is a right. Now, third one being a shareholder by virtue of shareholding the shares, especially in the form of equity shares or otherwise called ordinary shares. He has every right to take part in the meetings of the company and cast his vote. While coming to a debenture holder, he is not a member and hence he is not entitled to attend to any of the meetings and cast his vote because he is only a creditor of the company. Next, there is one more specialty for the shareholder. In case any shareholder is not able to attend the meeting and cast his vote, he has the privilege to appoint a nominee which is permitted by the Indian Companies Act, and the nominee is called proxy. Now, as per the rules, the appointment of the proxy must be informed to the company in a prescribed format, and that intimation must reach the company before 48 hours from the commencement of the scheduled meeting. This meeting may be either annual general body meeting and extraordinary general body meeting, because he is permitted, unlike general elections or parliamentary elections where impersonation takes place. It is not prohibited, but this is the special feature in the Companies Act. Now, coming to the debenture holder, he cannot attend any of the meetings, and hence he is not a member, so he has no right to make any appointment of the proxy. And this question does not arise. Now, one more thing we would like to add in case of shareholder. The proxy is a special nominee of the shareholder. Only one person can be appointed for one shareholder, and he cannot act for many members. Another thing is the proxy has the right to attend the meeting and take part in the elections, but he has no right to seek any clarification nor express his voice in the meetings, because his purview is very limited and confined to the aspect of attending and casting votes. Next comes the role of equity shareholder, who is a real owner and beneficiary of the residuary funds. His stay will be necessary up to the final settlement of payments pending to all the parties and fulfilling all the obligations, making all the dues and clear the liabilities of the company. While coming to the role of debenture holder, as and when the dues pertaining to a creditor, say debenture holder, is over, paid the entire proceeds along with interest, he will have to leave the company. There is no need to stay any longer, unlike a shareholder, till the completion of the entire process. Now, from this discussion, we have given an understanding. While concluding this topic, we feel it is better to go in for the equity shares with higher mixing and percentage of composition of finance and lesser amount of percentage of preference shares, which will not cause much impact on the finances of the company. because this mix will give a less burden and lighten the process. Whereas coming to the debentures, it is like feeding a white elephant, which will have bearing and an impact on the cash reserves and affect the financial health of the company. Now, a well balanced funding pattern must be designed with a higher volume of share capital and limited preference capital and further lesser amount or volume of borrowings from the external sources like debentures, bonds, or other loans. This mix will definitely lead a company to a profit margin, and this is the highly essential factor which need to be borne in by the financial management, chief finance officer, and others involved in the realm of affairs of the company. With this, we conclude this speech. Thank you very much.